friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's new Little Woodland Library Friends, Little Woodland Library, and Absolutely Awesome. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Bitsy Blooms 6x6 collection. So I'm going to take out a little scrap that I'm going to use for my color palette and tuck that under my cardstock panel. I'm coloring with my Copic markers, and I'm going to start with the hedgehog. I'm going to use E000, E50, and E11 for him, placing those shadows on the outside edges and blending toward the center since he is facing straight forward. And I am going to do 2 layers on that just to increase the saturation. I think he is just so cute. He is definitely my favorite image from the new Little Woodland Library Friends. So happy to have these additional little critters into the Little Woodland Library series. So moving on to his quills, and I'm going to use E55, E57, and E59. This time I actually started with my lightest shade, the E55, and I'm just doing little dash lines to fill in that area. And then I'm coming in with the mid-tone, that E57, and then I'll bring in the E59. I want to fill them in mostly completely, but I did leave a few little peaks of white showing just for some extra highlight in there, since the quills would be, you know, not exactly solid, it would be more bristly. And then I went back to that E55 and just added a few extra flicks to fill in here and there. Next, I'm going to add in some rosy cheeks using R20 and R22. Just a touch of that R22 first. I also use that to fill in the inner ear and then blend it out the edges with the R20. Then I'll add in the R24, and I'm going to use this combo for the apples. So for the one that is sliced, I'm going to add that to the top and the bottom. And then for the whole apple, I'm just adding it to the bottom and then up the left side, since that is where that leaf is. And then I'm blending out with the R22 and filling in with the R20. And I will start coloring in the stacks of books as well. I'm just going to pick a different book from a different area in the stack for each one. And I'm going to start my rainbow color palette there. So I'm using the colors that are in that pattern paper, but I'm going to put them in rainbow order with the red at the bottom. So wherever that red book is in the stack, that is going to start the rainbow. Again, I'm going to keep the R20 and R22, but this time I'm going to add in a lighter shade using R00, and I'm going to do my little bookworm. And I started to add the R22 all along the bottom, but then I decided that I wanted to color different sections. So I just used my colorless blender to remove that little bit of the R22 from the next one down. Then I'll blend out with the R20 as the mid-tone for the darker sections and use it as the shadow for the lighter sections. And then I'll just fill in with that R00, so it's just a subtle variation. Next, I'm going to move on to the orange in that pattern paper, and I'm using YR02, YR04, and YR07. And right now was when I was deciding that I am going to just build in rainbow order from the bottom up. Originally, I wasn't sure if I was just going to do like a mix of rainbow colors, but I decided to do them in order just to make it clear that it was a rainbow. So I started with that YR07, did my shading with that, and then I'm blending out with the YR04. I'll use the YR02 for the highlight, and then if there's any additional details, I'll do those slightly lighter. So we'll have a subtle contrast just like on the little bookworm. Then I'll move on to yellow, and I'm using Y02, Y06, and Y08. And because I'm building my rainbow from the bottom, I'm going to go above the orange. So in this case of the center stack, since the orange is at the top, I'm going to start from the bottom again with the yellow. So I'm using that Y08 first, blending out with the Y06, and then using the Y02 for the highlight. And again, just doing the details slightly lighter so that we have that contrast. And I did do a second layer on some of the shades as well, just to provide some extra contrast between the darker areas and the lighter details. I wanted that difference to be subtle, but definitely still noticeable. Then I'm going to move on to green, and I'm actually going to do two different combos for green, even though there's only one in that pattern paper, because we have the green in the books, but we also have the green grass, and I didn't want it to be the same. So the first combo that I'm doing is slightly darker than the green in the pattern paper, and that is YG05, YG07, and YG09, and that is what I'm using for the books. And then I am going to do that second layer before I switch to my next combo. Just increase that saturation, make those a little bit brighter. And then I will do the book that has the detail. I'll add with the YG05. And then I'm going to switch to a combo that is slightly lighter than the green in the pattern paper, and that is YG00, YG01, and YG03. I filled in the details on the book with the YG03 for the highlight, and then I used the darker two shades for the leaves on the apples, but all three shades for the grasses, and I did go back with a little extra YG03. Then for the blue in that pattern paper, I went with B00, B02, and B04. So I'm going to start with the B04, and I think this is a really good match for the blue in that pattern paper. It is a brighter blue, not an aqua, so that's why I went with the Bs and not the BGs. Again, I'm going to do the details with the lightest shade, which is going to be the B00, and I will bring in one extra shade in just a minute to finish that. But first I wanted to color in the book that the hedgehog is reading, and so I'm just adding that B04 down at the bottom. I'm also doing a second layer on the books and at the same time, and then blending out with the B02 and using the B00 for the highlight. And I did do a second layer on that book that he's reading as well. And when that is done, I'm going to bring in the B000 because I wanted to finish off the details on those books, but I also wanted to use this shade for the glasses to give those a little bit of color. And so I'm just going right over the coloring that I've already done there, so it looks like, you know, their skin is showing through, gives them a little bit of a transparent look. And then I also added a bit of shading with the B00. For the purple in the pattern paper is a cool toned purple, so I went with some blue violets. I chose BV00, BV01, and BV02. And I'm going to finish off the last two books. We only have two purple books just because that one stack was shorter, but I wanted there to be the variation of height, so that's going to be okay. But I'm going to finish off with that shade, and then I'm going to color in the book pages with E40 and E41. I'm placing the E41 closest to the spine, and also for the open book, I'll also add a little bit of that to the cut apple, to the inner part. Then I'll blend out with the E40, and then I'm going to leave a little bit of white space at the tip of the book pages as well. And I did go back with an extra layer of the E41, And now I'm taking a white gel pen and adding some extra little flicks into the hedgehog's little spikes to give them some extra highlight. And I'll add a little shine mark to my whole apple. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For my focal panel, I'm going to take some Tim Holtz watercolor cardstock, and I'm going to cut that into a circle using the Lawn Fawn stitched circle stackables. And then I am going to do a simple watercolor background using some Distress Oxide inks. For the sky, I'm going to use Broken China because this was the closest blue that I could get to for the Copic shades that I had chosen. I am going to add a lot of water to that because I don't want it to get too dark, and I am purposely putting it on pretty patchy so that we have the appearance of some clouds in the distance. I'll drop a little bit of extra color in a few little places just so it's a little bit more organic looking, and then I'm going to wipe off that acrylic block so that I can add my grass colors. I'm going to start with some Twisted Citron. This kind of represents the lighter green combo, and I will take that right up into the bottom of the sky so that we have a seamless transition between the two. And then I'll also add a bit of Mowed Lawn, which is going to kind of represent the darker green in the coloring, and I'll just add a few little patches of that. And then I'm just going to set this piece aside to dry. In the meantime, I'm going to work on my sentiment, so I'll pop my scrap cardstock there, and I'm going to stamp in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm using a sentiment from the Little Woodland Library Friends. It says, "Hope your day is one for the books," and I'm going to stamp that down twice to make sure that I have a nice, bold, legible impression. Then I'll pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawn Fawn Mermaid cardstock and stamping in Fish Tank ink. And I am going to stamp another one of the little critters from the Little Woodland Library Friends, along with the stack of books and the sentiment that says, "No one stacks up to you." So I think this could be used for a few different occasions, for a birthday or just like a congratulations or, anything like that. So I am going to go now to my pattern paper, and I'm going to choose a bigger piece of the one that I used as my inspiration, along with this beautiful rainbow diagonal plaid, which I just love so much. But I wanted to have a third print, so I'm going back to my pint size prints Summer as well. And I'm going to choose one of these to go along with the two that I've already picked. And I decided to go with this really pretty blue shade. I thought about using a fourth one, so I was just flipping through to see if there was something else that might be a good fit. And I almost went with this yellow, but in the end I decided that the 3 prints were enough. So I'm just going to trim these down. I'm going to trim the rainbow plaid and the floral print down with the largest of the Lawn Fawn large stitched rectangle stackables. And I ran that through my die cutting machine together so that the stitching detail along the outside edges would still match up. And I just held everything in place with a little bit of post-it tape. And now I'm going to glue that pattern paper to my card front. It will fit the entire front because the card base is an A2 standard size card. It is 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. And then I'll take that rainbow plaid and I'm going to add that to the center of the card a little bit high up. So there's a little bit more of the floral print showing through at the bottom than the top. And I'll just make sure that's on there nice and straight. Originally it wasn't quite, so I just peeled it back up before that glue had a chance to dry and fixed that. I've also trimmed down that blue pattern paper with the Lawn Fawn scallop circle stackables, and I'm going to glue my focal panel to that, just making sure that I have that centered. And I also like to make sure that one of the scallops is facing up instead of like being between scallops at the very top, if that makes sense. And then I'm going to add some foam tape to the back of this so that I can pop it up and give this card a little bit of dimension. So I'm just adding that to the back, and then I will peel off those release papers. And we're going to pop that up right in the center of that rainbow plaid piece. So I'm just making sure that I have an equal amount showing on both the left and the right, and then pressing that down. I'll bring in my images and also my sentiment, which I trimmed down with the Lawn Fawn Everyday Sentiment banners. I used the smallest die in that set of 3, and I am going to glue that down across the bottom of that focal panel. And again, just make sure it's on there straight. And then I can start to lay out my design. So this stack of books is actually the same as the next one, not this little one, but the two that are the same size, it's actually the same stack of books. I just stamped one upside down so that you get a different look. And I'm just figuring out which one I want to have on the right side of the hedgehog and which one I want to have behind him. And I decided I wanted that purple book down at the bottom. So that is where that one is going to go. And I'm just going to arrange these until I have a look that I'm happy with before I start committing and gluing these down into place. So once I have that stack how I want it, I'm going to add some liquid glue to the back and just start placing those down, using that little hedgehog as a placeholder so that I can make sure I have everything where I want it. Then I'll add the stack that is going to go behind him. So you can kind of see that that last book on the bottom is the same one as the previous stack is at the top. So it's just flipped upside down, which is great because then you get a whole nother look from them. And then I'll have the shorter stack over on the left, and I'll glue my hedgehog down in front. I wanted the whole apple to sit on the top of the shorter stack of books to give that a little bit of height, and also just to bring that little pop of red over to the top there. So I just had to peel up a little bit of that yellow book so that I could tuck that back behind. And I really like how that looks, but I kept going back and forth with that center stack. It just wasn't high enough for me. I wanted that to go a little bit more into the sky and fill in more of the space up there. I felt like it wasn't balanced. So I did have to carefully tear that up. And thankfully, you can't tell in the final card, like everything still came out nicely, but I just pulled that up and glued it so that we can actually even see a little bit of that yellow book, which is on the bottom, but because the hedgehog is so wide, you can't really tell that there's no more books behind him. I'm going to add the 2 little grasses on either side just to help fill in the scene. And then I'm figuring out the placement of my bookworm, and I wanted that to sit on top of the blue book, but it was glued down firmly. So unfortunately, again, I did have to kind of tear that up a bit, and it's not really easy to tear up from watercolor cardstock because it's so toothy, and very absorbent, so it really absorbs that glue quickly. But I was able to peel up enough of it that I could tuck the bookworm back behind, and then I could glue my grasses on there. And I did end up reversing this slightly and adding the grass out to the edge. And then I'm going to place that apple more toward the hedgehog so that he can be snacking on it. And I did put that at a little bit of a tilt just for some added whimsy. Of course, this card needed a little bit of glitter, so I brought in some Stardust Stickles. I added that to my apple, just going carefully around that white gel pen shine mark so that doesn't kind of smear. And then I added it to the little details on any of the books that were showing. And I also decided to add it to the book that the hedgehog was reading, just so we had a little bit of glitter down at the bottom of the scene as well. And that is going to finish this one off. So I'll lift that up to the camera so you can see it a little bit more clearly and give you another peek at the inside. I always adore making cards that have a book or reader theme, so this one was definitely right up my alley, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it too. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below the video in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!